Have you ever heard of sand eels? If not, they're small fish that burrow themselves into the sand when the tide goes out. And buried is the theme of the day. I mean, you probably guessed that already from the title. Alright, well technically buried and burrowed isn't exactly the same thing, but you get the idea. Oh hey, Gustav, how's it going? Feeling good today? We were just talking about how nice it can be to spend a little time totally unplugged. Cut off from everything, lying somewhere quiet, no one to bother you, enjoying the silence and the darkness to reset, think, maybe meditate. Not for too long. Let's just say something like an hour. How does that sound? Hey, you up for trying that? Nice, so it's not really an issue if the space is a little tight, right? Okay. Alright, but what actually happens if you're underground for that long? Will panic inevitably kick in at some point? Will you develop muscle pain? Does this end in death by default, or can he beat the odds? Let's tackle all of that with today's big question. 60 minutes buried alive, what's it like? So before we check in on our guinea pig, let's lock in the burial conditions for our dear Gustav. You know me, I like to do things properly, so we're putting him in a coffin. Because you know, if we just started shoveling dirt straight onto his face, the soil would smother him pretty fast. So, a coffin it is, slightly larger than the standard, about 6 feet and 5 inches long instead of the usual 6 feet 1 inch long. Since our guy's a little taller than the average. One small detail that will matter later, the coffin's made of cheap budget wood, like plywood. It's only for an hour, so no need to break the bank. What? Don't make that face, we could have gone with cardboard. And I'm not joking, cardboard coffins are an actual thing. So, Gustav will be buried in a coffin about 6.5 feet deep. That's roughly the standard. Factoring in the coffin's thickness, he'll have about 5 feet of soil above his head. And since he's only down there for an hour, no headstone this time, a marble slab and a heartfelt inscription will be for another time. One catch though, he'll spend 60 minutes underground, but his air supply is just shy of an hour. Yep, part of the experiment is the pressure. Will he get through the whole hour, and how? Alright, now that we've set the ground rules, time for the main event. It's been exactly 1 minute since our guinea pig went underground. We can see him, sure, but he's in total darkness. Not a single ray of sunlight is reaching him. Even if you're not claustrophobic, or even more specifically, taphophobic, you can imagine Gustav a little on edge right now. If you didn't know, taphophobia is the fear of being buried alive. A very relevant word for today, quite clearly. It's a fear as old as humans have been roaming the earth, and not to fuel anyone's anxiety, but according to Dr. Jean-Yves Perron-Oret from France, Gustav's home country, 4% of people are supposedly buried alive. That stat comes from a 1979 book, so take it with a grain of salt as modern medicine and technology have improved a lot since then. Fun and slightly grim fact, some people actually choose to be buried with their cell phones, just in case. So far, there haven't been any confirmed rescues thanks to someone calling from the dead. That said, there is a wild story about someone who was buried with their phone. As you might expect given the topic, it gets a little morbid. Imagine this, it's England, 2011. A grandmother passes away and her family decides to bury her with her cell phone. They'd call and text her constantly when she was alive, so it felt fitting. One day, one of the late grandmother's granddaughters texted her just a simple message saying she missed her. All fine, except the granddaughter got a reply. She got a response from her grandmother's number, no less, basically saying that everything was going to be okay. The whole family freaked out. They tried calling and someone actually picked up. It turns out the phone company had just reassigned the grandmother's phone number. So the person answering was simply the new owner of that number. He had no idea what was going on and figured his buddies were just pranking him since he just switched his number. So no calls from the dead in the end. Anyway, let's get back to our dear Gustav, who is still 1 minute into this experiment. Let's be honest, he's losing it a little, shouting and pounding on the lid of the coffin, which is basically the worst thing you can do when buried alive. When panic hits, your heart rate shoots up. And your breathing speeds up too, which means you burn through oxygen faster. And oxygen is the one thing Gustav doesn't have much of in that coffin. He should be trying to save it up. Once he uses up what's in there, that's it. He'll suffocate, and that will be the end of that. So it's smart not to waste it in a few frantic gulps of air. To use his oxygen more frugally and keep control, he needs to take slow, deep breaths, hold his breath shortly, then exhale slowly. Let's give him a moment to calm down. 5 minutes have passed and Gustave is still in his, well, grave. What? Too morbid? Not grave? Okay, 5 minutes buried alive. Is that better? Gustave's gotten his breathing under control and now he's wondering how to get out. And good news for Gustave, sometimes it is possible to escape a coffin if you're buried alive. We'll need a well thought out plan and just a little bit of luck. So let's shed some literal light on the situation. Smart, but that's actually a bad idea. The flame will burn precious oxygen and in your situation, every bit of O2 counts. Let's save it. Don't panic though, Gustave. Check your pocket. There could be, maybe, possibly, something a bit more useful. That's better, but don't worry, we put in fresh batteries, so that flashlight should last a while. Now that our guinea pig has a light source, he can try to escape from the coffin. Emphasis on the word try, as it isn't always possible to succeed, and some people have unfortunately learned that the hard way. In 2011, a man in Russia decided to test his limits by being buried alive overnight in his yard. A friend buried him about 8 inches deep into a makeshift coffin with a breathing tube. Things started off fine until it started to rain. A lot. Rain soaked the soil, massively increasing the weight of the earth above the coffin and clogging the man's breathing tube. By morning, the man had suffocated. He wasn't able to get out in time. Luckily for our guy Gustave, it's not raining. But will that be enough to make a difference in his escape? Gustave has now spent 15 minutes being buried alive. Contrary to what you might think, Gustave is still doing pretty okay. Between the initial surge of fear and dread at the beginning and the final frantic moments of panic accompanied with suffocation and, well then, death in the end, all the time in between, well, there isn't much happening physically to the body when you're buried alive in a coffin. Mentally though, things are a little tougher. It's a harder battle to fight off the panic and despair so that you can focus that energy on staying determined to stay alive. Luckily, our guinea pig isn't the type to give up easily. Are you trying to make some noise, maybe get someone's attention? Try using something metal, a ring, a coin, even your belt buckle. It'll carry the sound farther. But if no one's around to hear you, well, you're in trouble, my guy. As I said, you can sometimes break out of a buried coffin, but only under specific conditions. If the coffin is made of solid hardwood and the lid's screwed down, forget it. But with a cheap coffin, it's a different story. And if you remember, we buried our guy Gustave in a cheap plywood coffin. What? Chill out. The fact that it's cheap might actually save your life. Try pushing on the lid. It isn't solid wood, so it may not be very sturdy. The weight of the soil pressing down is weakening the lid already, so there's a chance. 20 minutes down, Gustave's got roughly 40 minutes left to get out. The good news is he's realized the coffin lid isn't very sturdy. He tried lifting it, but quickly discovered the weight of the soil is way too heavy to budge. Honestly, it's a good thing he didn't lift it, because if the dirt had poured in near his head, he could have suffocated. There's really only one solution here, to try to break the coffin lid with his legs. Yep, that's right. Kick with his feet or push on it with his knees. Once you crack it, soil will start trickling in. Gustave can pack it down with his feet, then with his hands, keeping his head away from the process so he can breathe. But Gustave could have avoided this whole mess with simply a different kind of coffin. Back in the 70s and 80s, a Frenchman named Angèle Haïs came up with a solution. He designed a special coffin specifically to prevent being buried alive, and the wild part is, it actually worked. Angèle Haïs's anti-buried alive system was pretty straightforward. The deceased person's wrists, ankles, and head were tied to cords. Any movement tugged a cord and triggered a sensor. That sensor was wired to a panel at ground level showing a human silhouette. As soon as the sensor tripped, a light would switch on over the moving body part and an alarm would sound to alert people. And Haïs didn't just talk the talk, he put himself on the line to prove it worked. In 1984, he had himself buried for roughly 30 hours. He thought of everything. A headrest to keep his neck stable, a small fan hooked up to an air tube, a false bottom, and even a roll of toilet paper for him to do his business, plus a thin tube connected to a water tank for drinking. And actually, for those with 30 hours underground, he filled that tank not with water, no, but with Ricard, a well-known French pastis, aka licorice-flavored liquor. While he did survive his experiment, sadly for him, his invention never received the success he had hoped for. Angel Haïs passed away in 2008, and yes, he was buried in his own prototype. Anyway, back to our guy Gustave, let's see how he's doing. Nice, looks like he's made real progress. Good timing too, he's got barely 15 minutes left to get out. By packing the soil down at the foot of the coffin, he's relieved some of the weight above his head. But it's far from over. There's still about 5 feet of earth between him and fresh air, and if he's not careful, one bad move could trigger a cave-in and suffocate him. Picture this, he gets overconfident, lifts the lid, and a clump of dirt drops straight into his mouth. Not ideal. So, precautions first. Gus, you're gonna need to undress a bit. No need to panic, I'll explain. Pull your Renaud sailor shirt up over your head to make a makeshift filter. The idea is to keep dirt from pouring into your mouth when you crack the lid and soil starts spilling in. Keep in mind the odds of him getting out so low are still slim. But by letting dirt in and tamping it down inside the coffin, he's creating a little headroom above himself. He won't be blasting through the lid like in a zombie movie, but he can wriggle free of the coffin enough to go from laying down to sitting up. There we go. Progress? Yes, but you're not out of the woods yet. Now he has to compress the soil all around his body to make space to stand. He's got to be extremely careful because a big cave-in could suffocate him. But he also has to move fast because if he takes too long, he'll run out of that tiny air supply and, well, same outcome. Let's check back in a few minutes and see where he's at. You can't see it under his striped shirt, but he's drenched in sweat, red in the face, and fighting the urge to completely panic. Gustave is running out of air, and if he doesn't reach the surface, like now, he'll pass out and then die. That said, for some people, spending time in a coffin apparently isn't such a big deal. There's a strange story in a book called On Spirits, the Holy Spirit, and Miracles by a French author, Jules Etude de Merveille. And unfortunately, while there isn't an English translation, in this story it is set back in India when it was still under British rule in the 1800s. A devout of Vishnu claimed he could lie in a tomb indefinitely. No food, no water. The British authorities jumped at the chance to discredit the fakir and by extension Hindu superstitions. And a fakir, by the way, is a South Asian ascetic holy man. The British authorities were convinced it would go wrong. So they proposed a test. The fakir would be buried in a coffin for 20 days. Yeah, they weren't doing this halfway. The lid was screwed shut and small holes were drilled to let some air in. During the entire time period, multiple British guards kept watch around the clock over the burial site to make sure there were no tricks and he couldn't sneak out at night. 20 days went by, and as agreed, they dug the coffin back up, and the fakir was alive. He took a while to come to his senses, and he wasn't exactly looking fresh, but he was indeed alive. Assuming the story is true, how he managed it is still a mystery to this day. Fortunately for our guinea pig, yeah, there we go. For once, Gustave actually makes it out in one piece, and he got lucky, very lucky. Sure, he was buried alive, and if he'd just waited calmly in that coffin, he'd probably still be down there. Well, maybe not for eternity, but at least until our next experiment. As you've probably gathered, we stacked the deck in his favor a little bit so that he could escape. The coffin was the kind you could potentially break open from the inside, and the soil wasn't wet or compacted, so it was relatively easy to push through. Either way, do not try this at home. Well, not in your home, but rather in your backyard. Anyway, you get the idea. Bottom line, getting buried alive, even if only for an hour, totally sucks. Unless you're a fakir, then apparently it's a chill afternoon activity. For everyone else, even with precautions, it can go very wrong. The one positive, if we can call it that, aside from the lack of air, there isn't some extra hidden danger waiting for you down there. Look at the bright side, Gustave. You dug yourself out while buried alive. That's one more absurd achievement for your already ridiculous resume. As for me, I'm off to check something in the backyard. Not sure if it worked though, since it rained last night. Alright, see you next time.